أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. In the name of God, most merciful, ever merciful, and may God's peace and blessings be upon His holy Prophet Muhammad and the purified members of his household and progeny. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil farajah. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah wa ala al-arwah allati hallat bithina'ik. عليكم مني جميعا سلام الله أبدا ما بقيت وبقي الليل والنهار ولا جعله الله آخر العهد مني لزيارتكم. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين. Respected sisters, dear brothers, السلام عليكم جميعا ورحمة الله وبركاته. We began discussing the theme of being able to distinguish between truth and falsehood in the world. Today, one of the sources of truth, as we are told in the world, is none other than science. The lecture today has to do with assessing the claim that science is providing truth. Of course, the topic would require a much lengthier discussion. There is a specialized aspect to this topic that we are not getting into. But inshallah, at the end of this topic, the aim is that we have tools, is that we are equipped to use our critical mind to assess when science is actually being science versus when science is going beyond the ability and the tools that science is equipped to deal with in the world. And usually this is a claim, this is called scientism. When science goes beyond the sphere of activity of science, the legitimate activity of science, it is called scientism. It reaches or overreaches beyond what it is equipped to do. In today's world, there are claims, there are calls to rethink and re-engineer society based on science. And we are told that science can potentially dictate and regulate every aspect of our lives. From the laws to the manner in which we erect and organize and engineer our societies, to what we should and shouldn't eat, to the structure of the families that we should have. For all of this and so much more and everything in between, we are now being told this is what science says. So what is science? Where does it start and where does it stop? And to what extent can we consider what science says to be the truth? This is what we're trying to answer today. We touched a little bit on this topic a couple of nights ago, so inshallah we start with that idea that we already planted. How does science work? Human beings encounter activities in the world. Those human beings who are very interested in explaining and understanding those natural activities in the world, they become scientists. They spend time and energy studying that phenomenon, whatever that phenomenon may be, and they come up with answers to explain what is happening. Solutions, hypotheses, let's call them theories. A theory to explain why is it that I am seeing this phenomenon? What leads to this phenomenon? What causes it? In which context, in which conditions does it happen, and in which does it not happen? Is it going to happen again in the future or not? Is there a way for me to manipulate this phenomenon or not? This is what humans deal with when they are dealing with science. But it's a little bit more complicated than that. The first thing we encounter is, so you come up with your theory, you come up with your answer. This is not enough to call it science yet. You've come up with a proposed answer, a theory. Now that you've done your work, and we are sure that this constitutes science, you've done proper scientific work. You take all of that and you bring it to the scientific community, to the community of experts of the world in science, to see how valid your claims are, your theories are. And this is where things start to get a lot more interesting and a lot more complicated. The first thing we notice when you bring it to the community of scientists is that as human beings have evolved and they have more and more complex, accurate, sophisticated understanding of nature, the more we're starting to realize that everything is connected. So if I'm working on a phenomenon, let's say that has to do with the human body, this falls somewhere under medicine, which falls somewhere under biology. In today's world, it's impossible to talk fully about biology without understanding the chemistry behind it, or to talk about chemistry without understanding the physics behind it. And depending on what field you are working in, at some point all of these fields connect. And when we look at it from a scientific mind, you can look at specific theories that fall within a specific dimension, a field of science, or you can look at the whole worldview that you have of how the world works, which is called a paradigm. Sometimes we hear that there's a paradigm or that there's a paradigm shift in science. What's the paradigm? The paradigm is not one theory. It's all of your theories in all these different fields and how they come together to give you your worldview of how the world works. This is your paradigm. So this already tells us one thing. When I'm going to the community of scientists with my idea, with my new theory, with my solution to a scientific problem, perhaps they're not going to accept it right away. There might be resistance. My theory may be the truth. It may be valid and correct. It may still not be accepted right away. Why? Because if my theory goes beyond my little question that I'm dealing with and it's starting to touch on other questions, it may need that the entire paradigm has to be readjusted for my theory to make sense within it, because they're all connected. Suddenly the math, suddenly the chemistry has to change, the physics here have to change so that this theory still works. Otherwise, we can't accept it. And the more the theory requires that all the other pieces of the paradigm change, of course, the more resistance there will be. Because it means a lot more has to change. A lot more experts and a lot more fields have to agree to do this change and to see that my theory was more accurate or answers the questions better than others. This is only natural. So this is already a source of resistance, perhaps, to the truth. We don't know yet. We haven't validated it yet. What else? And this is a very important point. When I go to the community of scientists, I realize, and I'm going to open a quick bracket here, brothers and sisters, this is not my analysis. I'm repeating work and research that exists in these fields. There's a field called the philosophy of science, with people dedicated to this field their whole lives. I've studied this field for 20 years. Within the philosophy of science, there's also fields like the ethnography of science or the anthropology of science. I'm mentioning this for those who are interested in pursuing this more. What's anthropology? What's ethnography? What do they do? You try to study human beings in their natural environment. You try to see how human beings behave in a specific environment without any intervention. You want to see how they really are. This is what the Europeans used to do a couple of centuries ago when they would go to Africa and to South America. They would perform anthropology work, ethnography work. We're going to watch these people that they considered inferior without intervening so that we see them, we watch them in their natural environment. And we can understand how they think, how they behave, what their belief system is, what their religious system is, and so on and so forth. With time, of course, that whole field modified, changed, got adjusted, and got applied in all sorts of other areas. One of them was science. Anthropologists and ethnographers said, we're going to go study this community of people called scientists to see how they act and how they live and how they interact with each other, and how they do this thing called science as human beings. And this is a huge reminder for us that this thing called science actually doesn't exist in the outside world. There is no science in the outside world. What there is in the outside world are scientists. There are human beings who perform science in their own way. Some more perfectly, some more imperfectly than others. Some better, some worse. But these are human beings. And this is where, when I go to my community, and we already saw a source of resistance, I have to remember that I'm going to a community of human beings. Usually these researchers tell us that when you go as a carrier of a new hypothesis or a new theory and you present it to the community of science, it will most likely be met with a lot of resistance. Most of the time the new theories, the new hypotheses are presented by younger scientists. You have a couple of years under your belt. You come into this field full of passion and full of enthusiasm, and you're bright and you're genius. And the people who now have to evaluate and assess your work are the authorities of the field who make up the community, who have been doing this for 20 and 30 and 40 and 50 years. Do you think that they're always going to greet all of your ideas with open arms? Especially if your ideas mean that perhaps the 50 last years of work that they have done is entirely invalid, was entirely wrong. If your theory is correct, then he just wasted 50 years of his life doing this work. Not just him, an entire industry behind him. If he is a bigger authority in his field, he probably has teams of researchers around the world with millions of dollars invested in this research. This is where we start to encounter perhaps human arrogance, human biases. Science is an extremely competitive field, extremely biased field. A field where you can't live in a vacuum. You can't just decide tomorrow, I'm going to do science, and you live your life doing science. You can, but you're not really going to make a dent in the community of scientists. Your work has to be funded. The funding has to come from someone who benefits from the science you're doing. Who is benefiting? All the science done in the world today is benefiting someone. It could be a specific industry, car industry, construction industry, whatever it may be. It could be that you are benefiting the sports industry, the medicine industry, pharmacology, government, it doesn't matter. Someone thinks that your work is worth funding. They will give you good money to do science. In return, the expectation is that you produce results. And there's huge pressure to produce results. You have to publish your results. You have to present them and show that your work is actually accomplishing something, producing results, advancing something. And if at some point suddenly you say, well, the science we're using is wrong, I'm not sure that the foundations that we've had for the past 15 years are correct, maybe we have to readjust. This is not always, again, going to be accepted with open arms. And if you are unwilling to continue in a lot of cases under that pressure, and you say, I threat therefore to leave, I will not continue, rest assured that there's 15,000 people waiting behind you in line to take your position who are willing to say, I will produce the results that he can't produce. And I am able to show progress and evolution and show that science has moved forward. Okay. All of this is already telling us what? Telling us that there is a very human dimension to science. Before I accept a truth simply because I was told science says, maybe I need to start applying my critical mind and say, scientists have said. Which scientists? And what have they said? And who may benefit from this? And to remember that there's a human dimension to all of this. beyond the human dimension. Science itself. How does it work? We said that I come to the world with an explanation of a natural phenomenon. So let's take a phenomenon that we already mentioned a couple of nights ago. We gave an example about gravity. Let's take that as an example. Today, the majority of us have heard about gravity. We're supposed to know what gravity is, each according to our own level of understanding our studies. Has humanity always accepted our understanding of gravity? No. Let's go back 2,000 years. A little bit over 2,000 years, we encounter a man that pretty much anyone who has studied human history and the evolution of human thought has said about this man that he is perhaps one of the greatest minds that has ever existed on earth as a human being. Aristotle. Did Aristotle believe in gravity? No. What did he believe in? He also has a full theory of how the world works, by the way. Aristotle is an incredible mind. He looked at everything and he gave theories to it. And they're very consistent, those theories. They make sense together, they're coherent. They hold each other in perfect balance. Aristotle said the universe has a center. The center of the universe is Earth. And Earth is spherical or circular because that's a perfect shape. And the circle has a center. And his theory is the theory of the natural positions of things, or the natural movement of things. He says that everything moves towards its natural position. And what is the natural position of things? The center. That's his theory. So if I take something and I leave it in the air, he tells me it will move to the center of the universe, to the center of the earth. Is it being pulled? No. Is it being pushed? No. There are no forces, there are no masses. This is the natural movement of things. And this was very consistent with the rest of his philosophy and the rest of his paradigm. Everything made sense. And people accepted that. That was the science. Fast forward centuries. In Europe, they came up with something called the impetus theory. The impetus theory says that if there is anything that moves in the world, anything material that moves in the material world, it is being pushed. So if I watch something that I try to hold in the air fall, it must mean that it is being pushed. And that's why things fall, because they are being pushed. Let's forward a couple more centuries. We encounter a man by the name of Newton, who writes incredible works. Paradigm shift. He introduces something and provides the entire mathematical argumentation for it. Solid math, Principia Mathematica, the principles of mathematics to explain the world. And he introduces what today we call classical mechanics or classical physics. And he says that there are very clear laws of motion between masses and energy. And if things are moving in this way, it's because of what he called universal gravitation. There is a constant from the earth, a rate at which things will fall to the earth because of the mass of the earth. And I will show that. And I will demonstrate how the rest of the planets move in this way. And everybody accepted that. That was the truth. That was the science. And then you fast forward a couple of centuries, and then you get Einstein, who introduces the general relativity. A couple of theories. One of them is general relativity. Paradigm shift. Everything has to change. Gravity is no longer universal gravitation. His theory goes way beyond gravity. Gravity is one thing explained by general relativity. E equals mc squared. He says for my theory to be understood, you have to rethink what the universe is. He says the world is actually four-dimensional. 3 dimensions of space and time. 4 dimensions. It's like a fabric, like a sheet. And imagine that you would take a bowling ball and put it in the middle of that sheet. What would happen to it? It would wrap around the sheet. It would curve to handle the ball, correct? He says this is what happens when mass is introduced in our existence. Any mass, as small or big. So if you were to keep that ball on the sheet and suddenly you put a little marble, what would happen? The marble would follow the curvature, the wrapping of the sheet all the way down to the bowling ball, correct? This is gravity. This is how the world works. These are the energies, and the energy and the masses are actually one and the same thing. They convert into each other. Okay. Which one of these is the correct theory? When Einstein came up with his theory, did he lock his office and go home and said, I have found the truth? Done? There's no more science required? No. In fact, he worked very hard until the end of his life. Why? And this is what we're trying to explain here. Scientific theories have an explanatory power. They have a certain ability to explain the world. Why did human beings accept to move from one theory to another and from one paradigm to another? Why? What we have seems to work. Aristotle's theory seems okay. It's because when the next theory comes, it has a lot more explanatory power. It explains a lot more. But you need to be a specialist to know what's missing from the previous theory. You read the works of Newton, and Newton tells you every few years, and he calculated how many years, every 9 years or so, he said in Principia Mathematica, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, God must intervene in the world and readjust the clock a little bit, so that all the planets continue to work in the perfect manner in which they work and follow their orbits and the sun and gravity and so on and so forth. What is he saying? He's saying there's something incomplete. There's something imperfect in my calculations where you let them go for a while, and then God must intervene from outside these laws to fix it again a little bit, and then He lets it go again and they work for a while. That's already an indication that there's something missing here. There's something that's not entirely accurate. It doesn't explain everything. That's explanatory power. And so when Einstein presents his theory, it has more explanatory power. It explains so much more of the world. Does it explain everything? No. At the same time, quantum mechanics started to appear. People started to discover all sorts of things about atoms and the world of atoms and submolecular, everything smaller than atoms. And they tried to apply the laws of Einstein, the latest discoveries to them. Nothing works. So they invented an entirely new science only for the world that is smaller than the atom. Quantum mechanics, quantum physics. And Einstein initially rejected that, but then he accepted it, and his work was trying to bring these two together. If this is true science, then we have to find a way to make all of this work together. We shouldn't need different types of science for all of this. And today we have dark matter and dark energy and string theory. Why? All of these are not things that have been validated in the outside world. All of these are things that were added to make sense of the science, because there are things that are imperfect in the science. So we keep coming up with theories, notions, numbers, ideas, adding dimensions to the universe so that the math still makes sense, so that the science still makes sense. Again, why are we talking about all of this? The first point that we made is that human beings are the ones doing science. The second point that we're trying to make is that science is our ability to explain the world, but it is never perfect. And it is always changing. In fact, the reason why this whole field of science emerged and progressed is because the ones who were looking at science were trying to answer a question. They said, when does science progress? When does science evolve? That question by itself is implying something. It implies that science is changing. So when I am told science says whatever, first I have to ask, which scientist is saying this? That's layer number one. Layer number two, which science is saying this? How do I know that this is not going to change tomorrow? Because science has changed a lot in the past. Things that were good became bad, and things that were bad became good. And this is not all. Science is one tool that human beings have to discover reality. And it's a very incomplete tool. It's a blind tool. And one of its biggest weaknesses is that it does not have any morals or any ethics to it. If you go back to the time when Hitler became the ruler of Germany, initially when Hitler came to rule, he was not interested in science. Science was not really part of his agenda or his program. And then he quickly realized that there is no better tool for him to use than science and scientists, for all sorts of reasons, to achieve his results. Did the scientists agree to work with him or not? There were exceptions. There are people who were persecuted because they had Jewish ancestry, for instance. They left. Some of them hid it and converted. But the majority of the scientists in Germany, they participated in the science. And they worked in Hitler's regime, in all the fields. And they produced results. And today when we look at it, we say it's awful what they did. The agenda was going towards sterilization and euthanasia and race hygiene, they called it, the cleansing of the race. The idea was that the German people had a pure set of genes. They were a superior race, but they had been corrupted by intermarrying, by linking with other races. And the result is that now they had a lot of people who were inferior, mentally inferior, physically inferior. And so therefore, the scientists had now a duty to clean up the pool of genes in Germany. And they worked with that, and they contributed to that. Today we would say it's awful. But thousands upon thousands of scientists worked in that for a long time. They worked in biology, they worked in race theory, they worked in chemistry. In World War I, the German scientists were the first to take their advances and their advanced knowledge of chemistry and turn it into warfare. They were the first to start using chlorine gas and mustard gas in war, in World War I. And the whole world initially said, this is awful, this is inhumane. The suffering that you are causing is not human. Not even in war should human beings be allowed to use these gases. The torture that they cause, the damage that they cause is not human. And then very shortly after, the Allies, the UK and others did the same thing and used the same gases and went even further. That's in World War I. And this continued. Physics and the perfection of rockets, the perfection of the nuclear bomb. There was a race. Clearly the science was giving us an indication of the awesome power of the atom. Maybe we can convert this into a weapon. And so there was a race between the nations. Some say Germany was not the first to produce the weapon because the head scientist was so afraid of the unknown devastation that would be caused by this bomb. So he found pretexts to say we're not capable, we don't know, we're not there yet, when he could have rushed things and produced the bomb. One theory is that he could have, because they were right there, but they didn't. And so he had a red line that he didn't want to trespass, because there were theories that said basically the bomb could annihilate the entire planet. No one had used it before. We don't know what its potential is, how much destruction it would actually cause. And the race went on between the states. Finally, the United States was the first to produce the bomb. And in World War II, the United States were not initially part of the war. They were outside of the war. Germany attacked, they expanded towards the east, and it was the Russians that dealt with Nazi Germany and the Axis, the countries with Germany. And they started to attack and expand on the west, and the UK and France and others had to deal with that. And the United States is across the ocean away from that, not a participant, not an active participant in World War II. But the Axis, the countries with Germany, suddenly attacked the interests of the United States through Japan. Japan took the United States by surprise in 1941, and they attacked a naval base in Hawaii called Pearl Harbor. And they destroyed it, and they killed many of their soldiers, and the United States was not going to let that go by without retaliation. And this was an open declaration of war against the United States from Japan and from the Axis. And so this is the United States entering into World War II. 1941. This goes back and forth. It's now full-fledged war. The United States during this time develops their nuclear weapon. The nuclear bomb is now ready. There's an internal discussion, there's an internal debate. Do we use this nuclear bomb or not? The nuclear bomb was supposed to be a deterrent mainly, meaning that it's effective not because I actually use it. It's effective because others are afraid that I may use it. And so they will not dare attack, and they will not dare threaten, because they know the awesome power of devastation that I hold if I wanted to use it, but I don't actually intend on using it. But then the discussion went back and forth, and finally they justified it. They said that this is a war that will go on forever. It's lasting too long. We need to put a quick end to this war. 1. 2. Maybe by doing this, not only is it going to make Japan and others surrender, but it will also be a deterrent to all others. That it will put an end to all wars, because no one will dare attack us once they see the awesome devastation that this can cause. So retaliation and deterrence. And then finally, we're saving lives. Instead of sending thousands, tens of thousands of soldiers to their death to fight these wars, we can just put an end to it in one shot. And so the justification became, we can use our advanced knowledge and our advanced science to the greater good. And so they dropped the first bomb. It was called Little Boy, August 6, 1945, on Hiroshima in Japan. And they dropped the second bomb August 9th, 1945, 3 days later, called Fat Man. And those were the 2 nuclear bombs that were ever dropped in human history. And those led to, they triggered the end of World War II. It's true, but they changed the world forever. And again, the idea here is not to talk about history or the history of the United States or World War II or any of that. We're talking about science. We're talking about the evolution and the progress of science. Today, when someone tells you science says, and therefore we must do what science says, inshallah, today I gave you tools and equipped you with arguments to use your critical mind. Science is done by human beings, by scientists. It's not as objective and impersonal as we might want it to be. 1. Science is imperfect, and it's always evolving and always becoming better. Which means, and this is a very important lesson, that you have to have things that are universal and that don't change. The science will change. It's a guarantee that it will change. Where are your universals? What is it that does not change with you? Where do you draw the line? Where do you take your ethics from? The ethics should not change. Where do you draw your morality from? Your morality should not change. The world can change as much as it wants. Morals don't change. Your identity does not change. And science lacks ethics and morals. It's not that science is immoral. Science is just a blind tool. You can do whatever you want with it. And so if today they say science says, if you notice that there's an ethical or moral dimension to it, you know that you are no longer in science. Science can look at empirical data, can look at the natural world and describe it, and that's it. That's what we use science for. The rest comes from out of science. And this has always been the case. We go back to the time of Imam al-Hasany alayhi salam. The science that he was fighting in his time was not natural science. It was religious science. For a while, the science was now saying, the religious science was saying, that if you are associating yourself with Ali and the followers of Ali, that you are a danger and a threat that needs to be removed from society. Right before Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, the Umayyad were employing the greatest judges, the greatest narrators, the scholars of religion for their own purposes. We have talked about a man in the past by the name of Shuraih al-Qadi. Shuraih was a judge, a knowledgeable judge, a competent judge. He knew fiqh. When Imam Ali had become Khalifa, he kept him as a judge. All you needed to do with Shuraih, he had a weakness. All you needed to do was to put an envelope of money in front of him. All you needed to do was to bribe him a little. You bribe him, he will say whatever you need, despite all that knowledge that he carries, all that expertise that he carries. And that's how you saw people like Hijr ibn Adi. He writes an edict, a ruling, that this is a man that has to be executed. People that were executed all the way leading to, and that was one of the reasons that Imam Hussein gives for rising against Yazid. These righteous people, the greatest worshippers, the companions of the Holy Prophet, well-known people, for their whole lives being eliminated one after the other in masses by the Bani Umayyah. So Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam rises against this and tries to fight this. He goes to the grave of the Holy Prophet, as we said in Medina al-Munawwara. He talks to the Holy Prophet. He cries at the grave of the Holy Prophet and he tells him, O Messenger of God, my grandfather, this is your son Hussein and the son of your daughter Fatima. And he has a complaint to make to the Holy Prophet. He tells the Holy Prophet, I want to complain about the nation you have left me in charge of. They have called us and they have betrayed us, Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam says. This is still in Medina. The Imam has not left Medina, then he goes to Mecca, then he travels all the way to Karbala. The Imam is already announcing. He tells the Holy Prophet, they have called us and they have betrayed us. And then he tells the Holy Prophet, I want you to be the witness. I want you to bear witness that I'm going to make this complaint to you, that they have not observed the right I have over them. And I want to meet you with this complaint the day I see you in the afterlife. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam bids his family members and others farewell. The toughest farewell to the Imam was the Holy Prophet's grave. But another difficult farewell of the Imam was his brother, Muhammad, the son of Imam Ali alayhi salam, that we refer to as Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah. He had talked to the Imam, he had begged the Imam not to leave Mecca, not to leave Medina. And if to leave, to go somewhere away where Yazid cannot reach him. And the Imam goes back and forth with him. He thanks him for his sincere advice. And he tells him, I've made up my mind. I am leaving and my companions are in agreement with me. And we are leaving together. Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah, historians say, was crying at that time. He tells Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, then why are you taking the woman and the children with you? Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam tells him, first, I saw my grandfather, the Holy Prophet, in my dream, and he tells me, Hussein, my son, rush to us. Come quickly to your mission. Don't delay. Don't postpone. Don't rethink. Come quickly to your mission. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to see me martyred. This is the destiny. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to see them captives. Sayyidah Zainab alayhi salam was watching this back and forth between her two brothers, Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah and Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. She came to her brother, Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiyyah, and she told him, Muhammad, what are you saying? My brother, what are you saying? Are you trying to convince Imam al-Hussein that I can't go with him? To keep me away from Hussein? I swear that my foot will be on the foot where Imam al-Hussein puts his foot. And my hand will remain in the hand of Imam al-Hussein. So that wherever he rests, I will be at rest with him. And wherever he travels, I will be traveling with him until the very end. Assalamu alayka ya Aba Abdullah. Assalamu ala al-Hussein wa ala Ali ibn al-Hussein wa ala awlad al-Hussein wa ala ashab al-Hussein wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi al-tayyibin al-tahirin.